Hello again, everyone. We're glad you could join us today. You know, we've been doing a series of shortened sermons, and our subject has been here of late. It's been on the things that Jesus has said. I can just say that I don't profess to know understand all the things, the meaning of all the things that Jesus said, but that we know that they're important. Everything that Jesus said is important. And the things that he said about his return are, that should cause us to pay even closer attention. So today our passage is going to be from Luke, the book of Luke chapter 12, and it'll be verses 35 and 36. And I believe, now not everyone agrees, not every commentary said this was talking about or referring to Jesus' return. But I believe that it is, and let me read it. It says this, it says, "Let your waist be girded, and your lamps burning, and you yourselves be like men who wait for their master, when he will return from the wedding, that when he comes and knocks, they may open to him immediately." So here in this passage, Jesus is using a teaching method that is known as a metaphor, and that is to say he's using one thing to speak of another thing. And the reason that he does this is just to help us to understand, and what he's trying to do here is to help us to understand how we're to be while we're waiting for his return. And I think that's the whole crux of the passage and the meaning today. So he says here that we're to have our waist girded for his return. Now, what does that mean? That's just saying one thing that he's talking about, meaning helping us to understand another thing. So the clothing of that day would be kind of it was most likely a long flowing robe. And so it was a robe-like garment. And when special activity needed to be done, you know, the flowing robe was tied up closely to the body. So you could just say it was girded to the waist. So the idea behind that is for movement. That is to say, you're ready to move and you're ready to go. So you wouldn't want anything to impede your progress or your ability to go. So that's really important, and that was the ideal behind it. So you didn't want something to get in the way. You didn't want something to trip you up, or you didn't want something you didn't want your garment to like get hung on something and it would just grab you and hold you. So you wanted to be able to move as it was, and to be able to move freely. So in our minds and in our hearts, we should be ready when Jesus comes. So I just want to let me just say this. I want to ask myself a question. So I believe that the Bible teaches that Jesus is going to come, and then when he comes, he's going to come suddenly. The Bible says that. So I'm assuming that that's going to happen because he said so. So I'm going to ask myself a question, and my question is simply this: am I girded, or am I ready for his return? So to not be prepared, would be the greatest of mistakes. So Jesus says this. He says to have our waist girded, but that's not all he says. He also says this. He says to have our lamps burning. Our lamps burning. Now, we don't use oil lamps today. Obviously, most of us don't. We have electricity, but this is another metaphor that he's using, and he's saying something that means something else. So, what does it mean to have our lamps burning? And I think if you could just think of a minute, why would you have a light on? Why would you have a light, bringing light up on it? Well, the idea would be so you could be watching and seeing, but also if it was dark and the lights are out, there's chances are what you'd be doing is sleeping. And so I think the thought behind this is don't be asleep. And again, that's a metaphor. We don't want to be in a spiritual stupor and not aware of the times and not aware of when Jesus is going to return. So thus we need to have our lamps burning so that we can be alert. So I think that's what this means. So the purpose is for watching. Now, it doesn't mean, I don't think necessarily, that we're going to be going outside and looking up at the sky. We certainly could do that and maybe see Jesus coming in the clouds. We could do that. That would be something, wouldn't it? We know that he said that that's how he's going to come. In fact, over in the book of Luke chapter 21 is a reference. There's a lot of information in that book that Jesus gives about his coming. Let me just read some of the things to you. It's quite startling. He said this, he says, "And there will be signs in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars, and on the earth distress of nations with perplexity." That means they just can't figure it out. And then he says, "the sea and the waves roaring." And then he says, "men's hearts failing them for fear and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth." And then he says, "for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory." So he's going to come, and it's possible that we may see him. We need to be watching and to be alert. But down again, back to our passage, we talked about verse 35, having our waist girded and our lamps burning. But let's look at verse 36. For what does verse 36 says? It simply says this, that he gave an example of how we should be. He said this, he said, "we should be like men waiting for their master to return from the wedding." So what would that look like? And what, if you could just kind of picture, he said, this is the way that we ought to be. So this is the message that Jesus has given us. We should be like men waiting for their master to return from the wedding. So if you could picture a great household, and a powerful man, the master of the house, that has many servants, and he has told his servants that he was going to be leaving and he was going to be going somewhere, but he was going to be coming back. And Jesus is saying, this is the way we should be. What should we be doing while he's gone? Well, I think there's three things that we should do. We should be waiting, we should be watching, and we should be expecting. If you could kind of picture those servants, those men that are waiting for their Lord to return, they wouldn't probably be sitting around and twiddling their thumbs and looking at each other. I'm thinking they would be about their master's business. And that's what we're supposed to do. All of us have something that we can do. We all have a job that we're to be about God's business while we're waiting. But not only should we be waiting for his return, but we should be watching. Now, what does that mean? It means that we ought to be alert to the fact that he could come anytime, and be aware of the things that are around us. Hey, we're living in really, really strange times now, and I'm sure that you know that. I mean, it may be, I don't know, it's just something that anything different, and that seems to be strange. It ought to make us think about watching for his return. And then the last thing is expecting him to come back. We need to understand that he told his servants that he was going to be leaving, but he'd be coming back. So they'd be expecting him. And so that's what we need to do. We need to be ready when he comes back and prepared so that we can open the door and open it immediately. Now, if we jump down a verse or two, and this is not something that we'll probably record, but this is what Jesus said about him. He said, "Blessed are those servants whom the master, when he comes, will find watching." I tell you, if we're watching and we're expecting him and we're prepared, Jesus said, blessed are those people that are that way. He says, "Assuredly I say to you that he will gird himself and have them sit down to eat, and will come and serve them. And then he says, and if he should come in the second watch, because we don't know when he's coming, if he comes in the second watch or in the third watch, and find them so blessed are those servants. So that means anytime, and we don't know when. So then he says this, he says, but know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed the house to be broken into. And then verse 40, he says, therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour you do not expect. So these words of Jesus are so important about his coming back. So how's he going to come back? He's going to come back, it sounds like he's going to come back like a thief. That is, certainly a thief, if he was going to rob a house, he wouldn't announce it. There's not going to be an announcement. It's going to be something that's going to come, and it's going to happen, and it's going to be sudden. In fact, over in chapter 21 of Luke, which is a great chapter to study about the Lord's return, Jesus said these words. He says, for it will come as a snare on all those who dwell on the face of the whole earth. Think about that. Him speaking about his return. He says his return will be like a snare. And the snare, we know, is a trap. I mean, it's something that closes and happens immediately and fast. And he says it'll come upon the face of the whole earth and all of those that dwell there. So he's going to come like a thief. Listen, we need to be ready. I guess that's the whole point. Now, it's very possible, because we don't know when he's coming, that we may pass from this life before he comes. And but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be prepared. He may come for us at the departure of our life. Our time here on earth has an end, and by God's grace, though, we can prepare ourselves for that. Whether we happen to be here when he comes, or our life ends, we can be ready. So I want to encourage you. Especially attention to the things that Jesus said about his coming and about his return. So let me end with just two questions. The first question has to do with myself. Am I prepared? That's a question I need to ask myself. Am I prepared? And then the second question is, are you prepared? And you need to ask yourself that. Well, thank you again for being with us today. I hope you have a really good week, and just be aware how important the things that Jesus said. He's the divine Son of God. Everything he said should be taken to heart. Like I said, I don't understand all of it, but what I do understand, I need to apply. So thank you again. I hope you have a great week.